A tank turret sat on a stand under the workshop lights, and beside it, on trestles, lay a gun that was obviously, absurdly, never going to fit inside it. The gun was Britain's 17-pounder, the longest, most violent anti-tank gun in the Allied arsenal, a weapon nearly the length of the tank that was supposed to carry it. A civilian engineer from the Vickers Company climbed into the turret with a tape measure and a notebook and began, once again, to work the problem that the official studies had already closed. The paperwork on this marriage existed, and its conclusion was one word: long, impossible. The recoil alone needed more room than the turret possessed. The breech would fill the space where the crew had to live. The experts had measured everything the engineer was now measuring, and the experts had ruled. The engineer's name was W.G.K. Kilbourne, and he kept measuring because across the channel there was a German tank that was eating armies, and somebody had to feed it something it could not digest. What the men who wrote the word impossible could not have known was what Kilbourne's tape measure was about to do to the balance of armored warfare in the West. That within a year, roughly 2,100 Shermans would carry the gun that did not fit, and they would be the only tanks on the Allied front line that could kill a Tiger through the front at fighting range. That German tank crews would be ordered to hunt down the long-barreled Shermans first, before every other target on the battlefield, an order that is the highest compliment one army's gunners ever paid, another's mechanics. That British crews would answer the death sentence with a paintbrush. And that in a Normandy field in August 1944, a quiet gunner behind Kilbourne's impossible gun would be credited with ending the most famous tank ace of the Second World War. This is the story of a gun with nowhere to go, a turret with no room to give, and the engineer who was told it could not be done and did it anyway. To understand why grown men were trying to force that marriage, you have to understand the fear that hung over every Allied tank crew in 1944. And the fear had a name: Tiger. 57 tons, armor like a bank vault, and an 88mm gun that killed Shermans from ranges at which the Shermans could not meaningfully reply. The Sherman standard 75mm gun was a fine weapon against most things on a battlefield, and against a Tiger's front, it might as well have thrown gravel. Crews watched their own rounds strike face-hardened German plate and bounce, glowing, into the sky. Range him, hit him, watch it, bounce, die. That arithmetic got into men's sleep and stayed. And in June 1944, 1 week after the invasion, the fear got its face. At Villers-Bocage, a single Tiger commanded by an SS officer named Michael Whitman drove down a road beside a halted British column and destroyed it. Tanks, half-tracks, and carriers, over a dozen vehicles, wrecked in about a quarter of an hour. One tank against a battle group's spearhead. German propaganda made Whitman the most famous tank soldier alive. Allied crews did not need the propaganda, they had the arithmetic. Something had to be able to kill that machine from the front. And in the summer of 1944, on the Allied side of the line, almost nothing could. Remember Whitman, this story comes back for him. Britain actually owned the answer, and that was the maddening part. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun could put a round through a Tiger's frontal armor at fighting range, and with its newest ammunition, it was arguably the deadliest tank-killing gun in the West. The problem was that it existed as a towed field piece, a huge, heavy weapon served by an exposed crew, and every attempt to give it a proper armored home had stumbled. The purpose-built British tank designed around it ran late and arrived flawed. The favored British cruiser tank could not take it. The one turret available in the tens of thousands, the Shermans, had been examined by the appropriate authorities and formally judged too small. And in a wartime bureaucracy, a formal judgment is a wall. It took stubborn men to climb it. A Royal Armored Corps major named George Brighty had already tried at the gunnery school at Lulworth, jamming a 17-pounder into a Sherman turret in a rigid mounting so crude that the whole tank shook like a struck bell when it fired. And he kept at it half in secret even as the establishment tutted. A veteran gunnery officer named George Witheridge, blown out of his own tank in North Africa by German armor and carrying the conviction of the burned, joined him, tested the monster, and started writing letters up the chain. At one point, the pair received formal instructions to stop the unauthorized work. They lobbied over the wall instead, and the problem finally landed where it needed to land, on the drawing board of a Vickers engineer attached to the tank program, the man with the tape measure. Kilbourne did not treat impossible as a verdict. He treated it as a list of engineering complaints, and he answered the list one line at a time. The recoil came first because the recoil was the killer. Fired from its field carriage, the 17-pounder recoiled roughly 40 inches, and 40 inches did not exist inside a Sherman turret. Kilbourne redesigned the recoil system itself. New cylinders, shorter travel, the gun's massive shove absorbed in the space available rather than the space desired. Then the breech, which in its normal position turned the turret into a coffin with no room to load. Kilbourne rotated the entire gun 90 degrees onto its side so that the breech opened sideways and the loader, working from his new position, could actually feed it. The radio, which in British tanks lived in the back of the turret, exactly where the recoiling breech now wanted to travel, was pushed clean out of the turret into an armored box welded onto the turret's rear, a steel rucksack that became the Firefly's signature silhouette. A new hatch was cut in the turret roof because the gun now blocked the loader's old escape route and no one wanted to burn for lack of a door. And to feed the beast, the whole machine gunner's position in the bow was deleted entirely, his seat and his weapons sacrificed so the space could be stacked with the huge 17-pounder rounds. Every single change was the kind of thing the studies had said could not be done cleanly, and none of it was clean, and all of it worked. In the autumn of 1943, the conversion was approved, and the workshops began turning standard Shermans into something the paperwork had ruled out of existence. One question before the new tank meets the enemy, about the wall Kilbourne climbed. The official study said impossible, and studies exist for good reasons, and most of the time they are right. In the comments, tell me where the line sits between respecting the experts and ignoring them. Now, the calendar takes over this story because the invasion was coming and the workshops were racing it. The race was close. By the eve of D-Day, only a few hundred Fireflies existed, enough for roughly one in each troop of 4 tanks, 3 ordinary Shermans, and 1 long gun among them, and the crews assigned to them discovered the price of the impossible marriage immediately. The gun's blast was enormous, a muzzle flash like a house igniting, so bright that the gunner could lose his own view of the target and the whole world could see where the shot had come from. The ammunition was so long that loading was a wrestling match. The early high explosive round was poor, which meant the Firefly was a specialist, a tank killer riding with generalists. But it could do the one thing nothing else in the troop could do. It could stand in front of a tiger and kill it through the face at fighting range. In the close, hedged country of Normandy, where German heavy armor ambushed at short distances, that single capability rearranged every engagement it touched. Squadron tactics rebuilt themselves around the long gun. The ordinary Shermans found and fixed. The Firefly killed. Troop commanders learned to hold their long gun back and blind, like a concealed weapon, revealing it only when the target justified the flash. And Firefly crews learned to change position after every shot because the gun that could kill anything announced itself to everything. The Germans understood this with professional speed, and their response is the proof of how much the impossible gun mattered. Tank and anti-tank crews facing British and Canadian sectors were briefed to identify and destroy the long-barreled Shermans first, ahead of every other vehicle on the field. The Firefly had been in combat for weeks, and it already had a price on its head. The British crew's answer has entered armored folklore. They took paintbrushes, and along the forward half of the long barrel's underside, they painted a counter-shaded pattern, pale below, dark above, so that at fighting distances, the barrel appeared to end halfway, an ordinary short-gun Sherman, nothing worth dying to shoot first. Camouflage usually hides a tank. This camouflage hid a reputation. Gunners on both sides now played a recognition game, where guessing wrong meant the difference between shooting the harmless tank and dying to the deadly one. And the Firefly crews, who had not asked to be famous, did their best to look boring and shoot first. Through the summer, the long guns collected their proof. Tigers and panthers killed frontally at ranges the 75 could not touch. And then, on the 8th of August, 1944, south of Caen, the story circled back to its monster. During the Great Attack toward Falaise, a group of tigers counterattacked across open ground near the village of Saint-Aignan-de-Cromesnil, and leading them in Tiger number 007 rode Michael Whitman, the hero of Villers-Bocage, the most decorated and publicized tank commander in the German army. Waiting in an orchard on his flank sat the Fireflies of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, and behind one 17-pounder sat a 21-year-old gunner named Joe Ekins, a shoe factory worker from Northamptonshire who had never fired the gun in anger before that morning. The Tigers came on in the open, confident, the way Tigers moved everywhere in Normandy. Ekins laid the sight, fired, reloaded, fired again. In roughly 12 minutes, 3 of the crossing Tigers stopped and burned. One of the 3 blew apart with a violence the witnesses never forgot, its turret thrown clear of the hull, and in that shattered tank died Michael Whitman. Honesty demands its sentence here, because the kill has been argued over for decades. Other guns were firing that day, other units later claimed the ace, and the battlefield kept no receipts, but the careful reconstructions, the timings, the angles, and the wreck itself have led most historians to the orchard and to Ekins, and the balance of the evidence says the most famous Tiger commander of the war was killed by the tank the studies said could not exist, firing the gun that could not fit, aimed by a conscript who had never used it in battle before breakfast. The impossible machine did not just kill Tigers. It killed the Tiger legend on its own chosen ground, in the open, through the armor. Ekins himself is the coda this story deserves. He fought on, was wounded later that month, went home, and returned to the shoe factory. And for decades he had no idea what he had done, because nobody had told him whose Tiger had blown apart in his sight picture. The war's most argued about tank kill belonged to a modest man making shoes in Northamptonshire. And when historians finally connected the wreck to the orchard and came to find him late in his life, he treated the whole business with a shrug that interviewers found almost unbelievable. It was him or us, he said in essence, and it was one morning a long time ago. He died in 2012, one of the last men alive to have looked at a charging Tiger through Kilbourne's gun sight and won. Whitman's remains, recovered decades after the war from an unmarked field grave, lie today in the German cemetery at La Combe in Normandy, where his stone draws a steady traffic of the curious. The tank that likely killed him has a longer afterlife. Around 2,100 Fireflies were converted before the war ended, arming British, Canadian, Polish, and New Zealand regiments. And by the last winter, the troops that had rationed 1 long gun in 4 tanks were fielding 2. Surviving Fireflies stand in museums across Europe and North America, and you can identify every one of them from across the room. The same way a German gunner once tried to at a mile by the barrel that goes on and the armored radio box on the back of the turret, the steel rucksack that marks the spot where an engineer pushed a problem out of the way because the gun needed the room. In 1943, the file on this marriage was 1 word long: impossible. The turret was too small, the recoil too long, the breech too big, and the experts were, on their own terms, correct. Then a Vickers engineer climbed inside with a tape measure and refused the verdict, turned the gun on its side, threw the radio out the back, cut a new door, and stole a crewman's seat for ammunition, and the impossible gun swap went to war 2,100 times. The Germans ordered it killed first. The crews painted it into anonymity. And in an orchard above Saint-Aignan, on an August morning, it reached out across the open ground and ended the most famous tank ace on earth. The experts had measured the turret correctly. They had just measured the engineer wrong. The Sherman, the studies protected, was ordinary. The one Kilbourne built was a monster, And every Tiger crew in Normandy learned to look for the long barrel and fear it. You have just followed one impossible verdict, from a tape measure to a burning Tiger at Saint Aignan, through a sideways gun, a painted barrel, and a shoemaker who learned his own story decades late. Finding stories like that is what this channel does. Subscribe to Frontline Echoes, and the next time the experts say impossible, you will know which stories to remember.